we're back. You're listening to the Xology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show on the International Business Growth Radio Network. I am joined here today by Leah Zimmerman. And Leah, right at the last section, right where we dropped off, we were just talking about certain conversations and how, for instance, individuals will argue and they just keep this cycle going and all this.
Yeah.
And you were about to tell us a story about your days in theater and specifically around Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. And,
Who's Afraid? Right.
And I can't let anybody move on without hearing a story that involves both the theater and Virginia Woolf. So please tell us that.
Okay. Well, I'm glad. I appreciate that. One of the things, I spent a lot of years in a particular acting class. It wasn't actually as much of a class as a workshop for working actors. We were always growing and expanding. One of the things the teacher would say is the conversation is the relationship. And if they're stuck, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is a couple who just continues to argue with each other. But the argument is the game. And the argument is the relationship. And the way they go at each other is the relationship. And we need to remember that, especially when it comes to family conversations. The things we do are the relationships. An example in my own life from that would be when I was young and I'd come home from college, my parents didn't live too far. It would almost always be that I'd bring up something with my dad, something I was thinking about in the world or opinion I'd come to or something, and my dad would argue with me and share his opinion, and I would feel pretty bad afterwards because there wasn't a lot of acknowledgement of mine. It was more him talking about his, and I was too young really to be able to think into my dad quite the way I understand him now.
Sure.
And I brought my husband, my then boyfriend, with me. And he goes later, if you feel bad after that conversation, you don't have to have it. You don't have to have these conversations with your dad where you feel bad.
Right.
Which sounds fairly obvious, right? So I did start shifting them, which takes some awareness to be aware of where the script is starting to repeat itself to be able to go a different direction.
Well, I want to let me call something out real quick there, though. What your boyfriend at the time, your eventual husband did there was a huge gift, and I think that's really part of, that's one of the things why family businesses in particular need an outside perspective sometimes to simply, one, see something, because, if you love your dad, but the way that you speak with him to reconnect after coming home from college is to argue about the issues of the day, which is really just two human beings trying to sort it out,
it's
right?
The way of connecting.
Yeah, but if it's
our way of connecting.
Yeah, but if it's the way you connect and it ends up with a way that ends up with somebody feeling, more powerful, somebody else feeling lesser than, and all these kind of things, to have somebody first call it out, but then be trusted enough and say, hey, look, you don't have to go that way. That's a really big gift.
And that is kind of a lot of what I do is help people to recognize where the script is repeating and what their alternatives are, because we're rarely aware enough in it ourselves.
Yeah.
My husband and I are fairly good at this. I keep going with reflecting always on a conversation. Where did it go the way I didn't want, and how do I bring it back? The thing I wanted to come back to also, though, is that there was a conversation distinct with my dad after it started to shift this dynamic where he talked about missing it. Because for a while, there was this vacuum.
Yeah.
Right? We found a different way to connect because that eventually was going to happen. But my dad, as like a lot of people, are topical. Talks about what he knows. Yep. And there's an unspoken rule about coming out on top and being right. Because to be wrong feels bad. But to play the game by those rules didn't work very well for me because I didn't feel heard. To shift the rules first creates this absence of connection. And that is the thing that keeps us stuck in it, is that we don't want to create that vacuum. We don't know what else will be there. And it's like we're backing off from the cliff. So we stay in those conversations because they are the connection. However frustrated and angry we feel, we're connected to it. And one of the first things I sometimes have to ask people is, how committed are you to the frustration, the anger, whatever it is that's coming up? Because we don't realize it, but we often are committed to it because it's the role we're used to playing.
Sure.
It's the way we know how to connect. It makes us feel better, maybe because we come out on top.
Yeah.
It makes us feel self-righteous because we get to be the victim and we're always, when we don't come out on top.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't realize it often. We are committed to those roles. And if we want to create change, we have to be willing to understand that it's going to feel less predictable, less certain. There could be a vacuum of connection because until you create new ways of connecting, there can be an absence. So often try to help the new way first and help people feel empowered to take a role so they feel like they're doing something on purpose and intentionally to divert the conversation and change the script.
So I'm hearing it's almost like having to take a break from something you're addicted to.
It is kind of, and it's not an addiction as in like the dopamine hit feels so good. We want to keep doing it until it feels better and we need more.
Right.
But it's something that's so familiar that it is often part of how we've wired ourselves in terms of managing our own inner resources. Mm-hmm. Lisa Barrett talks really well about this, and she talks about how emotions are made, that we have, our circuitry is really tied to other people, and we have learned how to self-regulate, which is how to preserve our own energy and how to find energy by the circuits and relationships we created with other people. So we're often reliant, if not addicted as in the dopamine hit way, but we are often not aware of how reliant we are on those relationships.
Yeah.
On the interact in those relationships.
Yeah. I think you're really starting to touch on some really important things here. In my book, Exotology, the part of the brain that we talk about is, people have the social part of the brain. It's the midbrain. It's not the fear-based, call it the lizard brain. And, obviously you're not talking to a doctor here, right? But it's the midbrain before you're in the higher functioning areas of either creative or logic. And that's that social part of the brain where all that connection and meaning around other primates, other humans comes from. And so I'm very curious. I'm workshopping in my brain right now. Here's what's coming up for me. Some scenarios that I've seen, and it's your classic third or fourth generation blue collar business. And, you have mom who did a great job working for dad, who passed it down to her. And now she's got the golden boy. And over here, she's got the black sheep. And, there's one who's still slaving away in the business, and there's another one who will never be allowed to touch that business ever again. Mm-hmm. And my question is, it's not like that's the only one out there. This kind of stuff happens all the time. So are you now coming to Thanksgiving dinner and helping these people through this? Or how do you even start to go there and help people move through some of this stuff?
Somebody has to get to the place where they say, I want something to change.
Okay. So you need a champion.
Someone has to decide they want to change. The person I work with is the one who wants change. So my experience so far is working usually with the child, the younger generation. Mm-hmm. I was hired once by older generation. The idea was we were going to help him become a coach and a mentor for his son who he wanted to take over the business.
Okay.
After a number of sessions, he didn't really want to answer any of the questions. He didn't want to go inward in any way to think about he didn't want to do anything uncomfortable.
Yep.
And some of it was just set up a meeting time. He didn't feel like he's not going to want to do that.
Yeah.
He wasn't ready to put himself to shift the role at all. And so then I said, let's see who else I can talk to in this business, because he wanted to just quit, and he'd already paid a whole lot of money. And I was invested. I cared about this family. So I wasn't ready to give up. So I said, well, who else can I talk to? So first I talked to his wife and the mom, who at that moment was not working in the business, but has been in and out. Okay. And from her, we got to the younger son, and I ended up coaching him for the rest of the year on how he could shift the dynamic. And he was struggling to find motivation. He was feeling that he didn't understand why he would just shut down and not want to do certain things that he was asked or told to do. Mm-hmm. So we had to work on what was actually happening with that, how to reconnect his relationship with the office manager, who was very loyal to his dad, and how to help step into leadership that would make people respect him in the office, which would give him the space he needed to feel motivated and like that what he did actually mattered. Yeah. And we also had talked about the things to pay attention to as an owner, so that he was schooled in how to pay attention to the marketing and the finances and the sales and the customers and the infrastructure and all those things too. He didn't really have a way of conceiving of that. He was also fairly young.
Okay. So
I'm finished. He was in a different place. So I had to go around to find the one who felt it enough.
Yeah.
And was willing to grow and change.
And so what you just said there is that usually it's the younger generation who is feeling that call towards getting that type of help for whatever reason.
Say that because I know there are other people who work with family businesses. Tom Huber in particular is someone who inspired me to want to work with family businesses. He has an excellent book called The Soul of the Family Business that I highly recommend.
Okay.
He, I know in his stories and what he's taught, has been hired by business owners often to create more harmony in the family so they can get along and function better in the business. Because we do have those business owners who know that they need to do something in their own leadership in order to make the whole team work better together.
Right.
But in my experience, and I think I work more with the individual, I have a different process and I come from a different place as a coach. I have been brought in or worked most effectively with the people who are coming into a leadership position, who are figuring out how to get under the shadow of a parent, how to find their own path. And I think that's just sort of also what resonates for me somewhat, as in the story that I told you. It was finding my voice out of a structure of a father who really wanted to be the one who knew what the conversation was going to be.
Okay.
By the way, it's completely different this many years later, just need to say that.
Yeah, I'm certain that it is. So we're going to wrap up here this section, but I'm going to ask you about a similar but different business case here in a few minutes after we take a break. But before we take a break, Leah, you have a few resources available on your website. Can you tell us what your website is and what those resources are?
Yeah, so my resource is steppingstoolcoaching.com, and it's stepping stool because that's my philosophy of what coaching is that I help people on the step stool where they can step up themselves. They're reaching things they would eventually reach faster and better. Steppingstoolcoaching.com, and there's a resources page. And on the resources page, you can get access to a number of things.
Awesome. All right, we'll be back after a short break. You're listening to the Xtology Unlock Your Profits, Unlock Your Potential show.